Hello and welcome to my review of the second studio album by UK recording artist and rapper M.I.A, her real name being Mathangi Arulpragasam. This is my favorite album by M.I.A, and I do plan on reviewing all of her albums on this channel, but I decided to start with this one, Kala, which is the name of her second studio album, because it was released 10 years ago this month, actually last week. This album was released on the 8th of August of 2007, and I think it's a very timely and important record now more than ever, and it has aged very well in the last 10 years. There was something always a little bit more futuristic about M.I.A.'s approach and artists like her that are so much more almost punk, but also infusing of so much different world musical influences. M.I.A. is from Sri Lanka, and this album is named after her mother. Her first album, Arular, was named after her father, and she felt that that album was more masculine. This album, she felt, was a little bit more dealing with her mother's struggle of taking care of a family and finding her place in the world. I wouldn't necessarily say that this album is actually that feminine, but it does come from a little bit more of a female perspective, so you could definitely argue that point. There is, though, a very in-your-face, loud, we're not going anywhere vibe to this album that has such a noise to it that is actually really addictive. It's not noisy in a bad way. It's just, it steps up the game from what her first album was. I love her first album, but for me, this album's a little bit stronger and a little bit more developed and fleshed out. Her first album is, I don't want to say more minimal, but there's a little bit less mixture of things in the pot as far as instrumentation and production. And in her, sample usage and in some of the references in her songs, though the lyrics are still extremely poignant, extremely relevant, extremely well crafted and clever. This album carries through that with the lyrics again, diving more into more deeper social issues around the world, not just in the UK or the US, but non-Western issues. She's always been a bit of a front for non-Western culture for the West, and that's something I've always loved about her and her approach. And it's always been more abstract, as she is sort of someone who comes from a very artistic side of things. She's very creative, not necessarily wanting to hit you over the head with a certain idea, subtly introducing things, using imagery that could be very dark or provoking, controversial even, and being unafraid and showing things that are not necessarily mainstream, or even that palatable to mainstream audiences. Kala is much more of a fusion of world music and different styles of hip-hop and Indian, some Caribbean influences. There's a little bit of Latin in there. There's some classic, UK edgy punk electronic vibes. It goes all over the spectrum, whereas Arular was sort of going off of some of the similar beats that she was using at the beginning of the time when she was working with Diplo. This album has him featured. It also has Switch, a very prominent producer that she's worked with a lot. This album was recorded in several different countries around the world. Jamaica, Liberia in West Africa, Trinidad in the Caribbean, Australia, and this album was, of course, also recorded in India. So there's all of these different elements of different sort of ethnic music coming together on this record. And it mixes and comes together in a very urgent and sort of pressing social message that carries through on really undeniably catchy, amazingly danceable tracks that really soar with M.I.A.'s amazing vocals. She doesn't have a singing voice, a traditional singing voice. She's not considered necessarily a singer. But when she does try, it comes off as very raw and real. And I like when even though singers know they don't have the best singing voice, they still sometimes do it. And she is definitely a rapper. But this song, this album comes together and cohesively feels like one big body of work so well. And so for that, I wanted to celebrate this. I love the album cover. It's very colorful. It's kind of a representation of like different sort of African art design that has still a little bit of a South Indian feel to it. And I really, her album covers are always such interesting kind of works of art because she designs them herself graphically and has someone help her put them together, and they're so powerful and important to her. So let's get right into this review here with one of my favorite tracks opening this record, one of the best album openers of all time for me, Bamboo Banga, which is, at the surface, it is definitely like a ode to sort of jungle stomping your feet, like let's get the party started sort of music. but it has so much lyrical depth that really drags you along for the ride. It slowly starts out with just these sort of atmospheric sounds of planes taking off on a runway or cars starting their ignition. It has this feeling of building to something. And then she samples an Indian song in the background so beautifully, and not over the top in that fact it feels like it's hitting you over the head that it's Indian, but it feels just so perfect to like kind of blend all of these things together. It introduces you to the style and framework of a lot of the songs on this record, and it's so catchy and addicting. It has her saying, you know, M.I.A. coming back with power, power, which is a very kind of, she's then used that in later records to sort of resample herself. She loves to do that. And so this feels like a very much call to arms. This is M.I.A.'s like saying, I'm coming to the front here. I'm going to assert myself on this record more than I did in the previous. This record for her was a huge commercial success, and really, especially for its breakout single Paper Planes later in the record, really it launched her to actual like international stardom. And so it was important, I think, for her to get a lot of messages across. I don't know if I don't think she expected the album to be so successful. I think it was quite a shot in the dark for her with all of this. And she knew that she was being really experimental. And she knew that she was definitely, trying new things here that maybe more so, not everyone was going to like it. And M.I.A. is very hit or miss. You either love her or you hate her. I don't know many people who feel in between. I definitely love her. And I was mostly exposed to M.I.A. through this album, so that's part of the reason why I want to talk about it. Bamboo Bang was one of the first songs I heard from hers, and it just got me so intrigued. I love world music, and I love very kind of ethnic, celebrations of culture that is not necessarily Western, and I love Bollywood Indian music and Bhangra music, and this isn't necessarily that, but it definitely pulls from a lot of different references. I mean, Indian music is so rich. Of course, Indian culture is so rich, and Tamil culture in particular, which is what she pulls from, which is from southern India and predominantly the Sri Lanka, the country which she is from. It's kind of ironic. I was looking at my shirt that I'm wearing today, and it says "Made in Sri Lanka," and I was like, oh, well, it's so fitting that I wear this for this review then, because M.I.A. has a very complicated relationship with her home country, as she did flee it as a refugee with her family a long time ago when she was very young. I'll get into her backstory more if I do when I do the Arulpragasam review, which will probably be the next M.I.A. record that I talk about. I'm getting off track though. I want to get into the next track, Bird Flu. This song is again another huge standout for me that it took me a few listens to really get into. It's very unconventional. It samples bird sounds, which is so kind of different and unconventional. It has again, it's a very stomping your feet kind of song with drums that are employed from West Indian, Tamil music. And it's very unconventional in its approach and delivery. It's got this very strange sort of backing child voice that says things in another language. I would assume the Tamil language. That doesn't really fully come into the sound, but it's in the background and it just kind of plays to the rhythm and beat, but it makes you feel like children are singing along, like M.I.A. is leading a chorus of kids through the streets. It's very unconventional. The lyrics are super braggadocious, and that's something that she does employ in a lot of her songs. She is a rapper after all. She's, I'm too cool to be a rocker on a label. It didn't really drop that way. My beats were too evil. She has this sort of sense of I'm a little bit better than some of the commercial industry that they were trying to mold me into something. I'm not going to be molded into anything. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to be rebellious. I'm going to be an outlaw from the Badlands. She self-references herself that way. I'm going to always be calling shots. I love then she always pulls in these really cool pop culture references. When she mentions watch Lost on cable, Lost was a huge show. Shout out to that amazing show that was popular at the time. Really missed that show. We come to the first single of this album right after that, Boyz. Again, super upbeat. We're starting this album all really upbeat. I mean, M.I.A. is always kind of mostly upbeat anyway. And it uses some very peculiar West Southern Indian instruments and drums. It's got such a very kind of infectious sort of backing pulse to it. And it's basically glorifying, it's talking about the positive characteristics and traits of men in her life or men in the world. but it has sort of a little bit of a feminist slant to it in that it's sort of talking about how they start all the wars and are they really that needed? You know, there's like all these kind of edgy meanings to it that make it sort of like it's a celebration of boys. Is it super sexual in that way? You could construe it that way, but I take this song as being a little bit more tongue in cheek. It's sort of saying like boys, well, we love them, but we can't, you know, always deal with their foolishness or their wars, the masculinity becomes too much. So it has a little bit of more of that context in it, but at the same time, it could just be construed as a really fun song about boys. That could be sexual, it could be all these things, you know. That's where, I mean, this album is presented in a little bit more of a feminine nature from R. This song wouldn't necessarily fit on that album, because this song is coming a little bit more from the perspective of a woman. And so it makes sense that would be included. This was a huge hit for her. This was the first single released from the record. The next track we come to is it's probably my second favorite song on this record, and it's called Jimmy. And this song is actually something that's very personal to her. It was a huge single, kind of unconventionally so, but this song was kind of unique because it's actually featuring kind of something that she's very much attached to her childhood. It's a disco song, and it has all these pop electro kind of vibes, but it's basically a cover where it samples this Jimmy, M.I.A, which is from Disco Dancer. It's a song, a movie from the 80s. And then she also, you know, the Jimmy M.I.A song is a song that she would sing a lot as a child. She would sing along to this song. It was very popular to her, and she would sing it for her mother and dance to it. So she wanted to employ that and make it into a fun kind of modern dance song. So it was a really kind of neat way of her bridging her past and sort of embracing that. And it's a very personal song that I think has some very kind of dark undertones to it that she employs, where she says, oh, I'd love to hear you sing, Jimmy. Where did you go? Why did you leave me here? I'm looking for you. And it has like a very kind of off-kilter delivery from her that's a little bit unusual for other songs. But it's a great, great dance song. And it does pull the most Bollywood strings that you could ever see. And this is M.I.A at her most Bollywood, I will say. Even though she's just sampling. This is definitely, you know, not something that if you hear it, you're going to hear it much in the rest of her music. You'll hear, you know, Indian styles of music, but they won't be this overtly Indian, I would say. But I love it for that. I love that she's paying homage to some of her culture in that regard. And a film that she really loves. So we come to now what I really am torn, because Bamboo Banga is really good, but I also really love this song. This song is called Hussel, and it features Afrikan Boy, who is a UK-based rapper, but has Nigerian roots. So she's going to Africa on this one. You know, he even says in his feature, "I think it's tough now, come to Africa." And this song has such a atmospheric, you know, in the jungle, in that, you know, raw, natural environment sound with the birds chirping in the background and the pulsing drum beats. It has some of the coolest and most clever lyrics, and yet it's such a tragic sort of song. It's touching on the struggle for people to survive. Why do people hustle all their life? Why do people cry? You know, why is this such a difficult struggle? It kind of endearingly pokes into that sort of space of like almost tragic, you know, third world poverty, that it's the first time on the album that she really hits home on that note and really makes you think about, you know, even though there's some tongue-in-cheek and fun wittiness, especially to her sort of bridge part where she starts rapping after Afrikan Boy, where she gets very kind of clever and witty and kind of atmospheric and abstract. There's such a underlying sentiment of hardship from this song that feels so raw. I mean, you have a lot of rappers in the US talking about hustling, you know, and it sometimes feels very manufactured, this idea of people, you know, there are people who are actually on the street. There are people who are in, not just, you know, in the US, but in third world countries who have no choice but to make money however way they can. And it's a tragic story of poverty and of never rising up from it. And we get this model so much from US-based rappers, but we don't get it so much from third world, you know, focused lenses. And I think it's important to bridge the two and understand the similarities in those struggles. I mean, the poverty that we face in a first world country is the same as the poverty that's faced from a third world country. It's all poverty. It's all extremely difficult for people to rise up. And there's this philosophical undertone of why is this like this? You know, is this a diss at capitalism? This song can be so many different things, but it artfully tinges at that emotional side to that. And it really tugs my heartstrings. And it's a really fun song at the same time, fun to listen to jam to. So for that reason and all those dimensionality aspects of it, it really does become kind of my favorite song on the record. Now we come to a song that was actually not even going to be originally featured on the album. It was going to be on like a mixtape that she was working on, but it's sort of featured as like an interlude song because the vibe is suddenly very quiet, it's very like toned down. It's called Mango Pickle Down River. You can tell that this song was very improvised in its structure and some of the lyrics. She's actually went to Australia for this song, and she actually featured for the first time, you probably ever hear anywhere on a major recording label, Aboriginal boys singing into the song. They're singing about their life, how they go jump in the river and catch fish. It's such a like fun children's chanting kind of song. Again, we're going back to this theory of like this theme of children and sort of raw youth and the core of like a mother taking care of children. She's sort of playing herself as a bit of a motherly role to these boys. She's talking about like, don't smoke meth, you'll catch your death. Like, all these kind of like, again, tongue-in-cheek sort of things that they wouldn't understand. She's being a little bit more kind of, PG-13 when she's talking about these things around young boys. But would you expect M.I.A. to necessarily be like a Mother Teresa figure in the fact that she wouldn't curse around kids? No, you would expect her to be brazen. You would expect her to be very controversial. And so she plays this sort of controversial mother figure really well in this song. It's just so unique. It has like the bass is just so like the didgeridoo like bass is just so uniquely sounding and so fits the theme of Aboriginal people who have a strong culture in Australia. And I love that she employed it in the record. It's the perfect sort of song between like much louder songs. The song is like chilled out and sort of just fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it does touch on serious issues. All of these songs do. The next song is very hard-hitting, very direct. $20. She has a song on her first album called $10, and this song is like a continuation of that. And this song is all about capitalism. This song is all about money and, inflation. This song was kind of inspired for her when she visited Liberia and West Africa, and she noticed how almost cheap they were to buy AK-47s, but how expensive it was to actually have like real things in your house that could take care of you. $20 ain't shit to you, but that's how much there are. In the US, we don't think much of $20, but in West Africa, third world countries, $20 can buy you a whole lot. And yes, it can buy you an AK-47. It's kind of frightening to us, but it's like, you realize that like war is such a big part of these people's unfortunate commerce in some ways. The way she sort of talks about the economic situation in these songs and the political climate, it's so shocking, but it's so true and tragic. But she also references, we still like T.I., we still look fly. We make ourselves, in a shanty town look so hip and so well dressed or poorly dressed on purpose. But we got all these issues. We can't even afford to feed ourselves, yet we still have our grills and our chain, hanging low. It's so, ironic in its delivery, but it's playing up of the ironic nature of like what people, especially youth culture in these third world countries, are kind of struggling with. And again, like some things are too expensive and other things are not expensive enough. This issue and dichotomy of how much money, how much things really should be worth, and what money really means to people who have actually not very much of it versus people who do. It's a very fascinating and very poignant trope that is going to become more and more poignant as we move forward when we start to realize again that things are like the money and economic climate in the world starts to become more precarious with the population explosion and all of these things, the prices of oil, all of these issues are going to come up. And she's always been kind of talking about the future here. She's been in not sort of like a apocalyptic way, but yeah, she is sort of alluding to like, we got problems now. These problems are going to be 10 times worse in 20 years or even 10 years. 10 years on, yeah, this album, you listen to it and you're like, oh God. You can't help but feel like she just knew how bad things were going to get. And especially when she talks about refugees, which she doesn't talk about so much on this album. Though in Hussel, she does talk about the sound of this sort of insular sound of beating on boats. She does talk about refugees on boats being an inspiration for that song. So there is a tie there. But in later albums, she gets more into that topic because it's becoming a very heated issue now. The next song is called World Town. This is sort of a thematic song that pulls on a trope that she's really popular, that she really is employed a lot in her later themes of her albums and music, which is represent the world town. So it's a globalist message. kind of, she employs like the sound of gunshots in this song. She does it later on Paper Planes. Whenever she uses it, it's so, I think, artistically pointed out to be there for that reason of, I'm going to be controversial, I'm going to stir things up. A gunshot is going to get your attention. A gunshot is a sound a lot of people were used to hearing, unfortunately, in some of these villages and places that she's traveled to. And she understands that through you bringing us all together, it's the only way we can build up and help these countries and help other people and understand different cultures. And it's a very unitarian globalist message at the core, but she doesn't hit you over the head or make it so obvious. She's using all these abstract, allusions to poverty, to war, to strife and struggle, of course, tons of political messaging, and just kind of at the same time not being too overt with that. She never directly references like a specific war or a specific politician by name. She keeps that to herself, though she does in interviews. The next song, The Turn, is a much more somber and down-tempo song, which is unique to the rest of the album. It's a very, it kind of gets lost in the mix of all the other big, world fusion sounding dance songs. This song is very emotional. It's a bit fatalistic. It's like the world is bothering me, but what can I do? I'm realizing there's all this horrible stuff going on, and I think that's where one of the aspects of like the feminine side of this album really comes out in this song. The war in me makes me a warrior, like a pit bull getting with a terrier. I'm better off in North Korea, yeah, dropping from a barrel of a carrier. There's such a, sort of almost like I'm given up. I'm trying so hard to be a uniter for all these bridges and groups of people and to bridge the East and the West, but it's so difficult. So the turn for me, it's like this is the turn of like idealism. Like, can I be like this idealistic? Is this actually beneficial, what I'm doing? So it's a bit self-reflective, and so she doesn't get this reflective in many ways on a lot of her songs, and I appreciate this sort of softer, more emotional tinged theme to this song against all the brazen other songs on the rest of the record. Because XR2, the next song, is, well, this song is definitely more like electro pop. This is more like hardcore electronic geeky kind of music from the UK. And this song is so clever. It's, you get this sense that she's like using all of these like clippings of different things and she's putting all together, and you have to construe the puzzle yourself. You have to make sense of all the things she does. And the computer like sound effects and the computer like way that she employs the lyrics to this song is she does this in later albums really well. This song would have fit very well on her third album, M.I.A, which was all about technology, all about the internet and data, computers, hacking. It was all about that stuff. And this song has that keyboard typing aesthetic where it just feels like digital data overload. The one point where she starts just using all these acronyms and just spitting them out rapid fire. XR2, 808, MP3, MC8, XOX, the MC5, MTV has ADD. That's one of the more clever lyrics there. NBC and BET. She's shouting out, the BBC, CB4, NYC had R&B, TLC, XXX, I Heart You, XR2. I don't know what XR2 actually means. I should probably look that up. But, we all know most of those, abbreviations. We all know almost all of these abbreviations. I mean, they're very popular. And she's using them and delivering them in a very robotic style that fits the sort of instrumentation that she's dealing with. It's like she's turning herself into an instrument or to a robotic machine. Has a lot of subcontext of like, artificial intelligence. I think that's a really interesting sort of route that she sort of just starts to explore with this album. She doesn't really get into that at all on her first record, and this is the first time that she's really looking in that direction. She'll explore that a lot more on M.I.A and a little bit more on further albums beyond that. Then we come to Paper Planes, the big mega hit that got her known everywhere, that was played on the radio, top 40. It got her singing with Jay-Z, and it got her, it got her in the circle, basically. And I think she finds it a little ironic, because this song has definitely an anti-capitalist sort of, like, anti-system, sort of message. It's a very FU kind of song. But at the same time, it also flips the script and says, well, if capitalism's so horrible, I'm going to use it to fix itself. I'm going to still make my money but it's going to be off of the irony that like I'm trying to diss capitalism. That's how I view this song. Paper Planes, you know, could be talking about money. It could be talking about like idealistic childhood innocence. The music video, you know, it's just a popular thing everyone knows. It was featured in A.R. Rahman's amazing Academy Award nominated film Slumdog Millionaire. And to be completely honest, Slumdog Millionaire was part of the reason I actually got exposed to M.I.A. because this song is featured in the soundtrack. And she actually composed a few songs for that soundtrack, or at least one song. And Paper Planes fit the vibe of Slumdog Millionaire so well. And then it came back to this album, and it was really kind of nice. And this song got really popular kind of a few years after it was released. It's not my favorite song of hers, though. It's a little overplayed, and I mean, the gunshot trope and I don't know, I just heard it so many times now. There's so many more kind of richer, more complex songs. I get like that a lot with a lot of artists' most top charting song is usually not my favorite song of theirs, because there's always deeper cuts that are just so much more, just because, I mean, you haven't heard them as much. That song got really overplayed. But it's still an amazing song. I want to just talk about the last song on this album. So it was really interesting. Timbaland was actually supposed to feature a lot more on this album in the production. Timbaland was huge in 2007, and he was definitely vibing with M.I.A., and a collaboration between the two of them seemed perfect, like a match made in heaven. Unfortunately, M.I.A. had visa problems at the time this album was being made. She actually could not travel to the US. And it's something that, unfortunately, she's had to deal with several times since then as well. In fact, a couple of years ago, or just last year, she also was denied entry, a visa into the US for similar issues, and it took her a long time to get a visa approved. So anyway, she couldn't record in the States, so Timbaland is only featured on this last track, which is not the best by any means. It's a nice little kind of track. It has her sound mixing with his sound pretty well. It's a little bit more kind of like just like a girl singing about her man, you know. It's a little bit more Nelly Furtado, I would say, which Timbaland was huge behind Nelly Furtado's success at that time, so it makes sense that I would have that sound. It's still a great song, and it fits and it closes out the album pretty well, because it's bringing things back to more kind of upbeat playfulness, a little bit more sexy and feminine. But it's a shame that Timbaland didn't get a chance to feature more prominently on the production of this record, because the two of them could have really kind of worked together really well. You have it. I think it's so important that she recorded all over the world, that she wasn't just, you know, that she was in the Caribbean, she was in Australia, she was in India, and she was sort of not looking to the West so much for formulating this record, because you get such a raw, kind of real grittiness to this record that Arular has, but some of Arular presents itself in a little bit more of like, this is definitely like a third world, you know, anthemic sort of talk about poverty song, whereas these are much more multi-layered and sort of like going into sort of a lot more different directions, technology, you know, ambient electronica. It's got all these different things in dance hall. She's really exploring all these different genres of music, just pure rap. She's, you know, I think her raps are actually a little bit even stronger on this record than they are on Arular. She's really finding herself as an MC at the same time. And I'm not a huge rap music fan, but boy does M.I.A. make me like her delivery of rap music. Her voice, she uses it in such unique ways that not a lot of rappers always try and, you know, think about using their voice that way, even though they're talking, not singing. So all in all, 10 years later, this is my still go-to M.I.A. album. It caused a ruckus, and it will continue to do so. It will continue to be so relevant given the political climate right now and going into the future. This album is looking so forward. It's not looking back. It's just unapologetic. It's raw. It's gritty. It's fun. It's summery. It's all of these things. It's ethnic. And it's a just wonderful tribute to the struggle. So I give this album A+, and I highly recommend you listen to it. Let me know what your thoughts on this record are. There's so much backstory to this record, so I was trying to really make sure I didn't spew any like misinformation. Like, I'm making sure I'm getting my facts right with M.I.A. because there's so much that goes into these projects. So let me know if there's anything I've said wrong that needed correcting. It's really hard to get all these facts straight. I'm not good with that kind of stuff. So I will review more of her albums coming up. I'll probably do Arular next. So looking forward to that. Thanks for watching. Have a great one.